I think about what I was doing when I was 15, and I was at the peak of my karting, and we were pretty successful at that time as I was transitioning to car racing, and it would be to enjoy every moment because at 15, I believed I was going to be I'd be in Formula One within 6 years or so, or IndyCar within 5 or 6 years. I believed that, and you kind of had to. You had to believe it. But I think that because I assumed it was always going to be there, I probably didn't stay in the moment enough. I didn't enjoy the moment enough. So I would tell myself to enjoy it, but also to relax a little bit. I took it so seriously. I'd get very nervous before the races. Just yeah, take a deep breath, relax, and just enjoy it because it's not always going to be here.
Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of The Johnny Rogers Show. I'm very excited for my guest today. He is a former professional driver, the owner of StreetWise Training Solutions, and the host of the podcast Your Town. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for my friend and yours, Rob McDonald. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me, John.
I already cut together a wonderful intro for you, so we don't need to. I've done it before in the past where I've read out the intro while the person is just sitting there, and it can just be so
Sure.
awkward. Someone listening to me say all the things about that person. Um,
Yeah.
but for those people listening, the way that I first met Rob was, well, I met you before you met me. We'll say it like that because I was taking the
Sure.
Audi training and I was watching all of these Audi training videos, Audi Canada, and you were always the guy. I'm like, oh, Rob's back.
Yeah.
Rob's gonna teach me some stuff. And then getting to actually meet you, at the resort for the Audi activation was just like cool as well to get to know you and learn more about the brand. But this podcast, the reason why I wanted to have you on rather, is to know more about you behind the companies that you work for. You were a
Sure.
former professional driver, is that correct?
Yeah.
So why don't
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
tell us
that's
a little
right.
bit
I
about
mean,
that?
yeah, I sure can. I mean, I think that a lot of in terms of what I do, obviously, automotive facilitation is a big part of my job, and then of course, video production is kind of a another arm that takes up a really big chunk of my time. So it's kind of divided up with the video side, and then there's the in-person facilitation, and then there's a whole other side that's revolves around curriculum design and development and project management. And so there's quite it's a little bit diversified in that sense. But
Hmm.
a lot of the folks that end up doing what I do, they have motorsport backgrounds, and that's certainly not a requirement by any means. It just happens to be the way that it works out sometimes. You invest your life into motorsports, and eventually most of us, myself included, eventually hit a roadblock. Most often it has to do with money, but I had a lot of opportunity leading up to that point, so I'm grateful for those years. But at the end of it, you kind of have this unique skill set, and I think especially at the age I was at, in my early 20s, it was I wanted to try to monetize that, like most of the other guys
Yeah.
that were in my situation, and so that started off with coaching at racetracks, doing stunt driving for the film industry, just anything that I would work for anyone that found my set of skills useful.
Yeah, you're like
And
like a freelancer.
that's the kind of the way that we did it for a long time. And I think that eventually I got in with the BMW brand. They had a global driver training program that they would do. In other words, you could take a driver training in the UK, the first level. You go to Canada, do the second level. You can go to South Africa and do the third level. It was kind of a global standard for driver training and a global curriculum. So that was kind of my first more intense exposure to the OEM side, to the manufacturer side. And then
Okay.
it starts off with just kind of teaching people how to go around the autocross course, teaching them how to drift M3s and have fun, teach them what an apex is. And then eventually that evolves into classroom learning, talking about product, and then eventually sales process and brand and history, and it just sort of evolves from there. But I think I'm I think the path that I took was fairly, I wasn't the first to go that path, and I probably won't be the last as far as race car drivers.
No, but it sounds like a
Um,
great like path to go. And like the Streetwise, is that your company that you started to sort of bring all those skill sets together in a more structured fashion, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, a lot of guys, they are their own brand, and they'll sort of work for a number of different manufacturers and try to fill up their calendar as much as possible. So that's kind of what I was doing in the late 2000s, and then I had an opportunity to join Audi Canada as a national sales company. It's quite young.
Hmm.
It's only been around since 2008. Before that, it was really set up as kind of a regions of the U.S., just extra regions of Audi of America. Then Audi Canada formed, and they needed an academy. And so once the training manager was hired, he was a friend of mine. I knew him from BMW driver training, and
Oh, that's amazing.
yeah, he was kind of like he still works for the company. His name is Doug Black. He's the director of sales for Audi Canada now. And yeah, he's like, listen, I have headcount. I'd like you to support the development of the academy in these early stages. And so I had a year of the corporate experience, which was really fun to build a training academy kind of from the ground up and help Doug with that. And then after that year, I decided that I wanted to get back to kind of freelancing and doing what I was doing before. And I was very fortunate that Audi Canada and Volkswagen Group Canada, I should say, were willing to set up my company as a vendor. So that's why I get to still work with the company, work with the brands, and
That's
Streetwise is the corporation that I set up to sort of help facilitate that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like that kind of a partnership is invaluable, right? To have someone that like, kind of you feel like gave you this great opportunity to like really
Yeah.
build upon your skill set, but then to be like, yeah, but I want to go maybe like try some other things. And they're like, yeah, sure, no
You
problem. Like
know,
here.
I don't know how well it was received by everybody. I mean,
Okay.
it doesn't necessarily send a great signal when you leave, but it's a credit to the people that were kind of in charge of the brand at the time. They said, well, listen, you've got a unique skill set. You've helped build this academy, and it would be great to keep leveraging that skill set. And so
Hmm.
I was really lucky. It just sort of cements my love for the brand, even though I'm no longer a corporate employee. I do have the four rings kind of in my DNA. I really, I am a true fan of the brand and the company, and so that makes it a treat to yeah, to continue to this day working in interesting training programs like Activation, where we met, which is certainly one
Yeah.
of my favorites.
And I
Yeah,
think that's the secret sauce to anything, right? Is to actually be have interest in something. People like to use the word passion a lot, like I'm very
yeah,
passionate about what I do, but I think a lot of it is interest. Like if you're just not interested in what you're doing, then you're not going to find any value from it, or you're not going to feel that same level of like I think when you're
hmm,
interested in stuff, you remember smaller details a lot better because everything is big to you. Like if we were
yeah.
to start talking about like wrestling in the early 2000s. I could tell you everything. I could tell you like who was on every roster because I was interested in that. You know what I mean? But that's
I
useless
just watched the Mitch
information to a lot
McMahon
of people.
documentary, so I
Oh,
remember a
it's
little bit of it
crazy.
now. Yeah.
The editing of that was like really crazy how they showed you all the stuff he did and then they played him going like,
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you the real story. I was like, whoa.
Exactly.
As a video editor, I was like, oh, that was some selective editing right there.
Pretty crafty, I thought
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
I
yeah. I
thought
was like,
too,
there.
but
Oh, there's the narrative beginning right away.
yeah,
This guy
yeah.
has got some demons in the closet for sure.
No
But
question.
even with like salespeople, like there was a new salesperson at one of the stores that I was talking to, and
Mhm.
he was like, "Oh, how do you know so much about whatever, like the Q5 or
Mhm.
whatever it was that I was telling him about?" And I was like, "It's just interest. Like I just, or
Yeah.
even the Q4, like I just really loved that car. So every
Mhm.
little piece of it, I wanted to know, like, what does this
Yeah.
do? How do you do that? Like trying to
Mhm.
figure it out, rewatching your training videos,
Right.
like just
Sure.
taking an interest in it. And then sure enough, that turns into success in
Yeah.
that line of work. Because then you come off as confident and knowledgeable about what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's really, I think you make a good point, and it's very important, that authenticity, especially in the type of job that you have as well. It's obvious to those you're speaking to when you don't necessarily believe it, and I think it can go a long way in terms of being convincing, to come across as authentic, and it's hard to do that if you don't have an interest in it, and I think that. My academic background has really nothing to do with motorsports, or the car business at all. And I only got back into this purely by accident. I have a master's degree in public administration. I worked for the federal government. I've worked for the BC provincial government.
Oh, wow.
And when it came time to move back to Ontario, I was kind of like, well, I'll just take this summer off. I'll go back to coaching racing, and I'll just have just do that for the summer. Then I'll get a real job in September, and I'll work for the government. Go back working for the government again. And I got a job working for a company called Ariel Atom. I don't for any of your listeners, if you Google the Ariel Atom, it's like a UK supercar. It's got like an exoskeleton rear engine. It's an interesting car.
What's it called?
But
Aerial
I
Atom?
called the Ariel Atom. Yeah, Ariel
Oh,
Atom. But it's Jeremy Clarkson test drove it on Top Gear.
oh,
It was one of
okay.
the fastest. Had one of the fastest laps on the. That's the car right there, exactly. So
Crazy.
it had one of the fastest laps on Top Gear for a while. But I worked for this company for quite a long time. Well, not quite, I guess a couple of years, and they were relocating down to Virginia International Raceway, and I didn't feel like moving down to the US, and so that's kind of why I broke away from them. But the main point I was trying to get to was that it was supposed to just be a summer job, but I kind of fell back
Mm.
into my enjoyment of it, my interest in the performance driving and the vehicles, and here I am today. This is 16 years later, and I'd say that I've decided to make automotive my career. So
Man,
you can't plan
everything
these things
happens
out.
for a reason. Like that saying couldn't be truer. Like there's so many moments where I was like, man, that really sucked that I had to go through X, Y, and Z. But I'm like, oh, but it made me appreciate this, and that's why I'm doing that now. And it's, any
I think you're
experience that
right.
you go through, whether it's positive or negative, you can find some sense of direction from what's happened to you.
I think you're right about that. And I honestly believe it's that you shouldn't try too hard to map it out, because you kind of need to be open to kind of what the universe throws at you. And sometimes you need to make a left turn, even though, your plan said otherwise. And so
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot to be said for that. And gosh, I think about back when we left high school and how they, asked us what do we want to do and start planning for
I
that. I mean,
hated
I
that
changed
question.
my I changed faculties 3 or 4 times at university. I mean, it
Yeah.
really doesn't matter, but I do think that all of the experience, whether I realize it or not, it comes into play on a daily basis. So
Yeah, no, totally. Like like right out of college, I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. So I started doing
nice.
I just immediately didn't do the thing that I graduated with a diploma and started doing comedy, which I could have done without going to college, but it was
That's
like,
impressive, Johnny. I have a lot of respect for people that can get up and do that. It's very different from what I do. So that's awesome.
but like doing that from like 19 to 33, like
Mm.
I have enjoyment of this little, like even smaller performance. Like when I'm selling, it feels like a little performance, I'm trying to make these people laugh. They're getting ready to make a huge purchase, and they'd at least like to be friends with that person
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
leading them
that's a good
into this,
call.
like
Yeah,
that's a lot. Like if somebody's gonna spend that amount of money on a vehicle, like they better like the person that's
totally. It
convincing
makes
them
a
to
huge
do
difference.
so,
It
and
makes a huge
I think all that sort of plays into it, every little bit of that sort of every time getting on stage and I don't know any of these people, but I'm going to try to make them laugh regardless.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, good call. And I think that you're right. I mean, I can see how it comes into play in what you do on a daily basis. I mean, when it comes down to it, we're trying to go beyond a transactional experience, at least in luxury automotive. That's one of the
Hmm.
goals. This is not it's not a need. It's a want. That's what it is. And so, I think that the less transactional we can make it, the more potentially emotional we can make it, and get the customer excited. That goes a long way. So your skill set is, I think it's well tuned for what you're doing.
Yeah, totally. Now the other thing too is this wouldn't you wouldn't have started your podcast either if you hadn't stayed in the Ontario area. Now you were saying it was Keswick that it was about, but then I looked up and is it Georgina is more accurate to like the area?
Yeah. Yeah, Georgina is kind of technically what the municipality is called, but it's made up of well, multiple towns. But Keswick, Sutton, and Pefferlaw are the main towns, and there's a few other small ones that are kind of wrapped into that. Towns most people haven't heard of, like Eudora and Egypt and Baldwin, and so
I saw there's a place called
um,
Beaverton, and I was like, oh, like the
Beaverton's a little bit outside of Georgina, but it's right.
yeah, it's
It's
like
still a
up.
lakefront. Yeah, it's very close, and it's just a little bit further up the shores of Lake Simcoe. But yeah, and I think that yeah, so it was very important to me. It's well, I guess we all have our own reasons for starting podcasts, but I think for me, I have this background in public administration. I mean, and although I'm not using those skills I should say I'm not using that degree on a daily basis directly. I do like to be civically engaged, and I think that's really the impetus for the podcast. I've served on the public library board and the property standards committee as a volunteer. As a resident, I've tried to do my part, but this was just a new way for me to be engaged with my community. So that's
I think that's a
that
lost
was
art. You know, like
yeah.
so I think there's been become over the last like 8 years so much focus on like federal level
Mm,
things that are going on where like
yeah,
that's
very much
that's
so.
all that people are ever talking about. And it's like, do you know what's actually happening? Like, do you know who the MP is in your local area? Because I
Yeah,
guarantee most people don't. Like, what's the name of your mayor? Like, do
yeah,
you
it's a
that's
great point.
stuff that directly affects you, right? Like how good the
Yeah.
library is, that directly affects you. How
It-
capable is your hospital? Like,
Right.
you
No, I
know,
think you're bang on that, and I think that that's a big part of why I started the podcast. Is I feel that our relationship to federal and even provincial politics or representation, it's we're kind of detached from it. We're removed. You're right. We give disproportionate. We put a lot of attention on it. We see a lot of memes and gifs, and whether it be positive or negative in terms of our elected leaders at the provincial and federal level. But on a day-to-day basis, I feel like we undervalue the role of the municipality. And I think that where we derive our bonds from, sure, we're Canadian and that's cool, and we're tied together across 7,500 kilometers and never had a civil war. That's great. But in terms of what defines me and where I derive my identity from, it's a little bit physically closer than that. It's my
mhm.
immediate surroundings, it's my town. So, and I also think that there's so much negative messaging out there, and anytime your algorithm just gets infected with it, and it's impossible to avoid that. I just wanted to do something that was all about pride and community pride. And so that was really my motivation for doing my podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a tourism guide too, right? Like I remember like years ago, Gary V was saying that he said one day everyone will have a podcast and it'll
Mhm.
be about whatever they're interested in. It'll just be them talking about what they're interested in. And he goes, and if people
Yeah.
were smart, if they lived in like a smaller town, they should have a podcast about that town and where the best ice
Yeah.
cream is. That could be an entire episode
Yeah.
of them ranking the top 3 ice cream shops in the area. And maybe those ice cream
Hmm.
shops would like to pay this podcast for that level of promotion. And now you have some
Hmm.
guy who has a full-time job, but he does this podcast on the side for fun when you can about something you're
Hmm.
interested in. And you're bringing in an extra couple $100 from local vendors in the area that want the promotion. And
Yeah.
then me, if I decide to move to that area and I Google it and this podcast comes up that I can sift through and listen
Hmm.
and read from somebody who actually lives there, that's invaluable
Hmm.
when it comes to real estate. So now you even have real
Yeah.
estate. Like the endless kind of like networking that can happen just from one person deciding to talk about what they're interested in. It always
Yeah.
amazes me, you know?
It's a really good point. I was surprised that nobody had done it already, if I'm honest,
Yeah.
because the town has grown quite a bit. And so it seemed like such a simple thing to do in order. And there's so many, if every town, all the towns that we grew up in respectively, whatever your hometown was, I guarantee you there's countless cool stories. There's interesting individuals, organizations, there's interesting history. And that stuff it deserves to be celebrated. In my opinion, that's how you develop a sense of community, a sense of pride. And the more you know about your town, arguably, the more proud of you, the more pride you have, and that can be infectious, and it can implicate your actions and the things that you support and take part in. And yeah, the cultural fabric of the town can be enriched through that. So I really believe that I don't know. I think it's a really simple and small thing to
Hmm.
do, but I get a lot of fulfillment out of it. Let me tell you. And
That's
the
great.
response is really positive. I mean, yeah, it's I think that sometimes while I do love what I do professionally, in terms, I derive fulfillment from other things, and one of them is definitely, yeah, having a sense of community. So that's really important to me.
Which right into the word of the episode, community, underlined on the unity
Oh yeah,
for the audio
yeah,
listeners. Yeah. So what was it
yeah.
about the that word that you wanted to make the word for the episode?
Yeah, it's funny. Like when you ask me that, it's an interesting task. It's not as easy as it seems.
No,
Like
no,
to
yeah,
pick
yeah,
one word, right? I'm sure you've
totally.
heard that before from
Yes,
other
very.
people, but it's
Yeah.
and so I kind of circled back to what was and again I looked outside of work and like what is and outside of the immediate things like family as well, and like where am I deriving satisfaction, or what not just satisfaction, but what has been really important to what I'm putting out there, or what am I putting out there, and what am I contributing? And I felt like it came back to that podcast that we just talked about. But I think that the starting point for that was my belief in community and how important that is, to have relationships with the people around me and with the town as well. Now, of course, on that term, I did, as you called it, I underlined the word unity.
Hmm.
And that was kind of, there's a couple of points to that. Like prior to doing the master's in public administration, I have an undergraduate degree in social justice sociology. So I grew up a kind of a punk rock kid, and I was really into um, yeah, this idea of unity was really important to the scene, but I felt like it had potential I'd love that to define it greater than just the punk rock scene, and
Hmm.
maybe it could apply to my community around me more broadly. But there's also a really great Operation Ivy song. Operation Ivy is one of my favorite kind of punk ska bands from the late 1980s, and they have a song called Unity, which is just one of my favorite of all time. And so I think that when I wrote the word community and I was typing it to you, the unity part kind of jumped out at me. And I thought, well, I'm going to underline that part because that's really that concept is really important to me, and it's kind of manifested in that song.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You're the first person I've ever seen point out that unity is in community. I've been staring at that word forever, and I'm like, oh, hold on a second. Yeah.
I
What?
I
What?
didn't
It's one of
realize
those
it
things
did.
where you're like, why didn't I realize this before?
I
Of course,
know.
that's what it means. Like,
Of course, it has something to do. I didn't pick up on it either, community. And I honestly, it was when I typed the email to you with that
yeah.
word that it occurred to me as well, and it jumped out. So I'm in the same boat.
That's so funny. So what was it
Yeah.
like? What was your, I guess, real first sense of like feeling what a community was? And I guess
Mm.
what about that feeling that you got or example of
Mm.
something that happened made you more community oriented? Because I would say like, to do a podcast about your town, you're community oriented. To go into public service work and
Mm.
then be on the board of the library and do these things,
Yeah.
you're wanting to foster and create community. And I think that comes from a positive experience you might have had.
Yeah, it's probably the accumulation of a few positive experiences, but I think that part of it was it started off with my role with the public library board and some of the different boards and committees on the town, that getting to meet other people that also felt strongly about this sense of community, about the community we lived in, about the town. And these are all folks that were just volunteering their time. They don't have to be there. They're not paid to do it, or if they are, it's a pittance. And they could just sit on their couch and watch Netflix. I mean, they could be just scrolling on the phone just nonstop. And not to
Doom
say that
scrolling,
that
as I
doesn't,
call it.
I'm guilty of that like anyone else, but I was really inspired by these people, and I thought, well, wow, there's people that really care about the community, and there's a lot of good stories that are coming out of that and coming out of this work. And so let's try to throw out a bigger net and start sharing some of these stories.
Mhm.
So I think that was a big part of it. I also am really lucky. The street that I live on. I live on a very old street in Keswick called Church Street. So it's a couple of churches on the street. The houses are all really old, and
I love when
I've got
towns do that.
yeah, it's great. Like my house is 155 years old, and
Yeah.
yeah, it comes with all the character and the problems that you would
Oh yeah.
associate with it. But yeah, there's a really nice community on Church Street that I any given time we look out for each other, and if you need a hand, whether it be a tool or a lift or anything that
Hmm.
you need, they're there for you. And that's in addition to obviously the social aspect and getting together on a Friday night or having a beer on the patio or whatever it
Yeah.
may be. I felt it. I felt the sense of community, and I wanted to be more tangible for others. And so, yeah, and that was again all wrapped into my motivation to create that Your Town Georgina podcast. And
Yeah.
I actually thought, Johnny, that the this concept and why I called it Your Town, it could be applied. I thought the framework or the
It's
format could really be
franchisable
applied to
for
any
sure.
town. Well, yeah, and I hadn't. You mentioned the monetization. I
Your
haven't
town
gone through that.
Aurelia, your town
Yeah, well,
Peterborough,
Your Town, exactly,
your
and
town
then
wherever. Yeah.
exactly, and the logo can be adapted. I have the longitude and latitude and some
Sounds like you
imagery.
started a podcast network and you didn't even know it.
No, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking like it could be any town that did this,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
this happened.
yeah.
But I think calling it Your Town is really important because
Oh,
it's
that's
a
great.
reminder that it's your town. You
Yeah.
should be proud of that and be proud of where you live. I think that's a
Totally.
good thing and a good reminder also as the demographic is changing and our towns grow and new people come in. I think I try to be very inclusive in my messaging, and this town is for everyone, and it's important to remember why it's so special. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I think
Yeah,
that's
I'd never heard of Georgina, Ontario before. It was funny though, because I my the street that I grew up on was called Georgina Street in
oh
Brockville.
really?
Yeah, so I was
Oh no
like,
kidding.
whoa, that's a weird
That's
like
funny.
that's one of those like weird universe plays where there's
Yeah,
just like a
cosmic coincidence.
commonality that you zero in on where you're like, what the hell? Like, what are the
Yeah,
chances of that?
that's funny. Yeah, that's really funny. The town of Georgina is not that old. I think it's maybe 40 years old since it incorporated. But
Really?
yeah, I don't even know. I'm gonna have to look up the etymology, like where that. I actually don't know where
There
that
might have been
came
like
from.
somebody in the royal family. Like I feel like a lot of these names that you see
Georgina,
constantly,
totally,
there was somebody somewhere down the
totally,
line in the British royal family and they named it after
totally.
Princess Georgina or something like
I
that. And
think you're
she
right
was,
about that.
that's why
And
every town has a King Street.
of course,
Every town
yeah,
has to have a King Street. Like that's
that's a
always
good
anywhere
point.
you go.
Yeah,
And it's
maybe
always
that'll be an
downtown.
episode.
Like, yeah, yeah. These
Where did
weird
this come from?
things. Yeah, yeah, weird
Yeah.
things. I remember I had like the whole like early forming of Canada is really interesting to me.
Hmm.
My great grandfather and his brother
Hmm.
came over from England to Canada in probably like 19 like early 1900s,
Yeah.
and then and was brought here as a kid because like they were abandoned by their parents. There was like rough
Hmm.
times there, so they were taken
Hmm.
from a foster family or foster care or whatever. And then in those days they literally shipped foster kids to this new country to help with
Yeah.
like farm work and like building of cities
Yes.
and stuff.
Right.
And then the war happened and he had to go back to the country that shipped him away to, I'm
Right.
like, could you imagine like just even 100 years ago what this country looked like and like
Yeah.
what people had to do? Like I feel incredibly grateful when I drive on the 401 and I'm like, somebody built this.
Yeah.
I didn't have to build this. Like all of this has
Too
already
wild,
been
eh?
laid out for you, and you start to gain a real appreciation for like little things that I think most people miss.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. And the experience that you described of your family, I've read a little bit about that. That was a very common practice at the time to take kids from potential some of the many underprivileged kids that really perhaps their parents were maybe it was a single parent and they were overwhelmed or whatever
Yep.
it may be, and sending them over to the new world, right? That was a very common
So
thing, and
insane.
and with all the consequences around that, I mean, it tore
Yeah.
a lot of families apart, and there's been a lot of reconciliation around that since then. But yeah, I mean, that apart, I mean, to keep a positive note on it, I'm also in awe, and I don't know if you've been driven across the country yet. You mentioned the 401 as one that's obviously part of the
Yeah.
Trans Canada, but it's pretty overwhelming when you get the opportunity to sort of work your way across this incredible landscape. It's
It's
hard to
massive.
believe that it's hard to believe that it's all one country and that it's tied together. And I did talk a lot about the importance of the small town, but it is amazing. It is
Mhm.
amazing. The fact that this thing is held together as long as it has and without any major conflagration, right?
Somebody
So
said that I think it was like Newfoundland or Nova Scotia or something is somewhere on the East Coast is closer to Ireland than it is to like Windsor, Ontario, just because of
yeah,
how big the landscape of
yeah,
Canada is. And when you put it like that, you're like, it's massive. Like you could drive
it's
for
really
like
crazy.
3 days and you're still in Ontario. Like, like it just,
No,
it never ends.
you're absolutely right. I went to the University of Victoria for most of my school, and I decided to drive there. And the faster way is to cut through the U.S. You can shave off a few
Yeah.
hours, but I wanted to see Canada, and I remember thinking, I'm like, okay, it's about a five day drive to get there. And Ontario seemed to take forever to get
Yeah.
out of, right? Like you get to the prairies, you start checking them off, but man,
Yeah.
just to get to Ontario, you're like, I don't know if I'm gonna 5 days. Am I
I
gonna make
can't
it? I've
do
been
this.
driving
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
20 over 20 hours.
Yeah.
I'm not outside
Yeah.
of Ontario yet. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's but it was quite an experience. Quite an
No, no,
experience.
for sure. That's definitely something that I do. It's on like the bucket list of drive across to the West Coast and then down
Yeah,
through the US, come back over and come back up. Like a little loop
nice.
sort of would be fun to do for
Great
sure.
idea. Yeah, great. The old-fashioned road trip, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we don't do that
What?
stuff anymore.
No, it's true. It's
Life gets in the
true.
way,
Yeah,
right?
it does. Yeah,
Um,
I feel that as well.
so what do you what's next for like what you're everybody always has plans for what they
Mhm.
want to do next. We talked about not like trying to plan too much, but obviously you have like hopes and dreams and things that you want to achieve.
Sure.
Like, are you like putting more focus on something with the podcast? Are you thinking
Mm.
like automotive ambitions?
Mm.
Like, what is it for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, I don't see myself leaving automotive. It's been good to me, and as you said, there's an interest there that is kind of in my bones from the time I was very young, going to racetracks as a 6 and 7 year old, starting go-kart race. It's in my DNA. So I think that I'll continue down that. I'm also have a lot of great opportunities and good clients, and so I want to continue to leverage that. But I also, from a professional standpoint, see it changing a little bit in the years to come. The days of spending 200 days on the road are kind of
You're like a
um,
rock star.
I'm a little over it. Oh, I wish it was like that. I wish it was like that.
Yeah.
I think that. You know,
Good morning, salespeople.
oh my gosh. Yeah, yeah, exactly. You're right. Here is everybody ready to
Come in
learn?
like
No,
Michael
it's
Scott. Yeah.
oh yeah, he's my fave. But, you know, I think that you know, I've got a couple of I have a couple of kids now, and I've got a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, my wife as well, and I just feel that I'd like to it was fine when I was, you know, when I was single, when I didn't have kids. But it's man, it goes quick, Johnny. This the parenting thing. The kids are only in the house for 18 years or so,
Yep.
and it's going by like a blink of an eye. And so I'd really, in the coming years, I would like to restructure things a little bit and to be
Yeah, no
able to
kidding.
have the freedom to do that, right? Like to say no to certain gigs and to look after maybe more of the managerial side of things, the administrative side of things, and perhaps have the freedom to decline the odd job and trip and stay closer to home. I think that
Yeah.
that's kind of where I see things going, and that's going to require me to scale things a bit, grow the company, be comfortable delegating more, which is
Oh,
always
that's
a hard
always
thing
tough.
to do, to let go.
Trusting someone with a job that you know you can do very well. Oh,
Yeah, I just
that's
don't. I don't.
tough.
Yeah, I just how it's very difficult, and
Yeah.
I unfortunately, it's almost that you can see it as a weakness, the inability to let go and to need to want to have your finger on
Mm,
everything is it's exhausting and stressful, and I at some point I need to start to loosen the reins a little bit, let
yeah.
go, and let some other folks look after some of these other aspects of the business.
Yeah.
But I think also outside of that, you know, the podcast, yes, is very important to me. I'd love to have more time to spend on that. Yeah, I was very impressed at your efficiency and how you produce these. It's
Wasn't always
really
this way.
very impressive.
Took a
Very
lot of
impressive.
failures, man. Like I took a lot of like trial and error, trial and error. I had probably three podcasts before this one, and
Is that right?
they
Yeah.
all just petered out because I wasn't interested in it. It started to feel like work. And so I didn't want to do it
Yeah.
because the whole point of doing it was that it didn't feel like work. That's why I wanted to do a
Yeah.
podcast. And then it just so happened that I had the right environment to do it in. I had the equipment from over the years, and Zoom became
That's great.
accessible for everyone because of COVID, and it just
Hmm.
the timing just worked out. Like it just
I think
literally,
it's awesome.
yeah.
I
So
think it's
even with
awesome.
yourself, like if you decide to delegate, think of this ripple effect for a sec. You delegate
Mhm.
all of your duties to people that you trust that want to go on the road. They don't have families. They would love to travel the country and experience the same thing
Mhm.
that you got to experience. They go
Yeah.
do that. You're looking at it from an administrative, managerial point of view. You get to stay in your town. You spend more time with your kids, making those memories, which then leads to more
Mhm.
podcast content and
Yeah.
more connecting with your local community, which you love to do anyways, because you're there, you're
Yeah.
present now, you're always there. Like in stand-up comedy, half of getting booked is just showing your face. And someone goes, "Oh yeah,
Mhm.
that guy." And then and they go, "Do you want to be on this show?" And
Right.
I'm like, "Yeah, I would love to." You know,
Totally.
it's interesting like how just showing face just leads
Oh
to
man.
so many things, right? So
So true.
yeah, just putting
So
that
true.
in the back of your head.
I know I appreciate it, and it's good to get that encouragement, and also to somebody that has the experience like yourself. Yeah, the promotion of it is fallen by the wayside. You know, just to have the time to do that. Also, to get more content out sooner would be nice. I'm kind of doing one a month right now, and
AI.
that's just the frequency that works for me right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's but I also think that if I do get things structured a little bit better for me from a professional standpoint, that in 10 years, maybe I'll do a run for town council and engage with my town in that way. It's at
Tons
the
of
small
content that
means.
way.
Yeah,
You just
yeah,
get a
no
videographer to
kidding.
follow you around as you make statements.
That's a good call. Yeah, that
Yeah.
might be maybe if I can build the podcast enough in the next 10 years, that will be a nice kind of springboard into
Yeah.
you know, the political game. But I do like the idea of of representing maybe a ward within my town, and it's not a full-time job. You have to have like another job, but that maybe I can get to a point where I can devote a little bit more to that side of things, and I think that would make me really happy.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now there's one
Yeah.
question that I always ask all my guests. This is usually the
Yeah.
last question of the podcast. I
Yeah.
want you to think of yourself at 15 years old. I always say
Yeah.
think of yourself at 15 because it's easier than just giving some general advice to some young person out there that you
I
don't really
remember
know,
15.
right? So you remember
Yeah.
yourself at 15. The phone
Hmm.
rings and it's you now on the other end, and you can give yourself a
Mm.
piece of advice based on what you know now. No, it's not going to affect
Hmm.
your future whatsoever, but might affect theirs. What do you say?
Oh gosh. Well, for me, it's pretty clear. I think it's I think about what I was doing when I was 15, and I was at the peak of my karting, and we were pretty successful at that time as I was transitioning to car racing, and it would be to enjoy every moment because at 15, I believed I was going to be I'd be in Formula One within 6 years or so, or IndyCar within 5 or 6 years. I believed that, and you kind of had to. You had to
Mm-hmm.
believe it. But I think that because I assumed it was always going to be there, I probably didn't stay in the moment enough. I didn't enjoy the moment enough. So I would tell myself to enjoy it, but also to relax a little bit. I took it so seriously. I'd get
Mm.
very nervous before the races. Just yeah, take a deep breath, relax, and just enjoy it because it's not always going to be here. I think that would be my one piece of advice. Yeah, for my 15-year-old self.
Yeah. And see, that becomes applicable for anyone for whatever they're currently going through, you know? You see how I do
Yeah,
that?
I think so. I mean, I have a really hard time staying like this is a work in progress, staying present and that whole concept of staying present because I think we
It's
spend
rough.
way too much time thinking about the past and the future.
Hmm.
Man, that's the majority of what I do, and I'm 47 now, and I'm only just starting to get a grasp on how to stay in the moment and stay present. So
It took
it's
me a while to figure out. I had this period where I was like constantly like daydreaming about like past events, but like we're
mhm.
talking childhood, like weird, like thinking about like the way I used to walk to school or something as I was just, I was working as a server, as I was like cleaning a table. I'm just like daydreaming about a past. I'm not thinking about future. I'm thinking about like a better time as I'm doing this
Yeah,
terrible thing. And I was like, oh,
yeah,
it's because I don't like what I'm currently doing. So I find like
right,
a good rule of thumb is if you're daydreaming about the past, it's because you're not enjoying the moment. And so change
yeah.
what you're doing in the moment, and when
Hmm.
you're enjoying what you're doing in the moment, you're having fun and you lose track of time and you're not thinking about what's gonna happen or what has happened. Is like because
Yeah,
this whole idea of like, oh, just be present. It's like you can't just like tell yourself to be, it's like telling
no.
yourself, be happy. Just be happy.
Right?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
feeling. You can't just like instruct yourself into a feeling. You could choose to be confident, but you can't
yeah.
like tell yourself to have a feeling.
I think that's good advice, Johnny. And I think the first test is, be present. And if you can't stay there, or if you don't want to stay there, then yeah, you're probably right. You're probably not doing the right thing. So
Hmm.
maybe there's some other way to spend your time or to
Yeah.
expend your efforts, right?
It's like your brain sends these like sort of subconscious like signals because it can't communicate with you directly. Like the
Mm,
conscious voice in your head for those people that have it, because apparently there's people that don't have that voice, which is
right.
another whole other fascinating thing to me. But yeah, I'm like, how do you plan out a conversation? Like I just say it.
No kidding.
Yeah, yeah, no
That's hard to
filter.
imagine.
Hard to imagine, but that conscious voice in your head isn't always going to be feeding you the best information. So when you're getting that subconscious, like thinking of anything else, it's yeah, it's your body trying to tell you, like, look, you don't like this. You're just having a hard time admitting it. That's all it
Yeah.
is. Like it's like a friend trying to give you advice, and you're like, yeah, yeah, I know.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. That maybe it's not just a mental deficiency of some kind that you're always
Yeah,
thinking about the past or
I
the future. It
can't
might
stay
be
in the
that what you're
present.
engaged in does it's
Yeah,
not worthy of being present. I don't know.
yeah.
That's a really
Oh,
good point.
it's like
I
when they
think
say
that's
that kids are like a little boy, they're like, "Oh, he must be hyperactive because he can't calm down." I'm like, "Or he's a little boy."
or his little boy.
Let him run
Yeah.
around and then see if he sits still, and you're asking a little
Oh,
boy to sit
totally.
still and be good. It's like it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, we do like to label. We do like to put labels on things, don't
Yeah,
we?
yeah, yeah.
So
Just helps us
yeah,
better understand, you know what I mean? If you put a little label on it. I'm
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
share your podcast here so that people will go listen to it. If you're listening,
Oh, I appreciate that.
Your Town dash Georgina, the podcast link will be in the description below. And you don't need to
Yeah,
be from there to enjoy the podcast. You can listen in like a fly on the wall
yeah.
and learn
We,
about
I
Georgina.
appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, you can see that the last episode I just released last week is the Georgina Paranormal Societies. It's a very spooky Halloween episode,
Oh,
and
that's perfect. I don't do as
yeah,
good a job of staying on like a theme brand. Like I probably should have done some
I don't
dressed
always. It
up,
just that
dressed up, you know?
totally. It just lined up
Yeah.
that time, and
Oh, that's
but
great.
yeah, I appreciate the plug. It's nice to get people listening, so
Yeah,
makes it
that's this
worthwhile.
whole podcast network. Like the reason I like to connect with actually fellow podcasters is because I'm watching what people are doing in the US and they're so good at like just sharing each other's network. Like especially with
Mm.
comedians. Say I like Theo Vaughn as a comedian, right? And Theo Vaughn will be on five people's podcasts. He'll be on, and you're like, well, why would you listen to all of them? Because he's going to be saying the same stuff. It's like, no, he's going to be acting differently with each of these people. And maybe this show is a theme, and maybe this show is a more serious conversation. And if you
Mm.
like and enjoy that person and that personality, you're going to want to listen to them on all of these different podcasts. So as
Yeah, well
podcasters, I'm
said.
like, the the more that we share our networks with each other and offer each
Mhm.
other guests, and I think this person would be good for your show and you should go on and do their show, the bigger they become because more people start listening that weren't listening before because maybe you have a different network than what I have. But if we share the same
Totally,
guest and then they go down this rabbit
totally.
hole of all the other shows that guest has been on, then they find me or they find somebody
Yeah,
else. And it's like this
that's
just
right.
not happening in Canada, like this sort of unity to bring it around to the word
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
community of podcasters.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah.
Yeah, we aspire to that. What does Malcolm Gladwell call the tipping point, right? We want to
Yeah.
get to that point where all of a sudden it starts to catch on, and that's the way you do it. You need to get people, yeah, you need to get people talking, and that community is probably one of the best ways to do it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, I hope this podcast gets people talking. Thanks so much, Rob, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Johnny, thanks for asking. It was a real pleasure, and keep doing the good work, man. It's very impressive, and yeah, I'm wishing you all the best.
Thank you. You as well. Have a good rest of your night.
Okay. All right, take care.
Bye. You've been listening to The Johnny Rogers Show. New episodes air every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.